to go recording. We'll just wait till that has started. Okay, so that tells me that that's started, so we'll make a start. So I'm just going to share my screen with you to show you some initial information about our assessments. So just get that up. Okay, so obviously, as I said, for anybody that was a little late joining, my name's Claire Humphreys. I'm one of the assessors for Potential Plus UK. I work at the Milton Keynes branch. So we have currently two main branches, one in Milton Keynes and one in Gloucestershire. And for a short period of time, we've also got a centre available in Cheshire. So for anybody that's kind of in that part of the country, it'd be a bit easier. We are offering a few assessments just up until July, I think. Okay, so our assessment service was established in 2013 with the clear mission to identify and support children and adolescents aged from 3 to 17 who demonstrate high learning potential or giftedness. So this is not just about recognising high IQ scores, but about understanding the whole child and their cognitive abilities, their emotional needs, social skills, and personal experiences. So we take a holistic approach, combining both quantitative and qualitative data. I'm just going to admit a few more people as we go. And this includes standardized tests to measure IQ, academic achievement in reading, writing, and mathematics, working memory, processing speed, and sensory processing differences. And these sensory differences can be indicative of overexcitabilities. It's a concept introduced by Dabrowski, which suggests that gifted individuals often experience the world in more intense ways. But we don't just stop at the numbers. We also gather some comprehensive background information from parents and schools. And importantly, we listen to the child's own views as well. This includes insights on their developmental milestones, socioeconomic background, areas where they're advanced or maybe lagging behind, behaviour, social skills, emotional regulation, and even their levels of happiness and satisfaction at school. And we also observe personality traits, attention, and growth mindset during the assessment as well. So our framework is grounded in Pfeiffer's tripartite model of gifted identification and Gagnier's integrative model of talent development. And by using these models, we ensure a broad and nuanced understanding of each child's potential. We also provide recommendations that cover parenting skills, teaching strategies, emotional regulation, and academic challenges. And our goal is to offer meaningful support, not just to improve academic performance, but also to enhance the child's overall well-being. So to give you a clearer picture of our assessment process, I'm just going to break it down into what we evaluate. So first, we conduct quantitative assessments. So we use IQ tests to measure a child's cognitive ability. We use achievement tests to assess their proficiency in reading, writing, and mathematics. We evaluate working memory and processing speed, which are crucial indicators of executive function. And we look at sensory processing assessments to help us understand if the child experiences overexcitabilities as described by Dabrowski. So these assessments are also complemented by qualitative evaluations, and we collect background information from parents and schools asking about developmental milestones, behaviour, strengths, social skills, emotional regulation, and more. So these are our assessments in a bit more detail. You can see we've got the early years assessment for potential, high learning Potential Assessment Plus, High Learning Potential Assessment Light. So these examples are taken from our website, obviously with a bit of information about each one, but we're just going to have a look at each one in a little bit more depth to help you understand what each one involves. So the early years assessment is for 3 and 4 year olds. We offer this in person, and this is looking at language, understanding across different areas of development, providing a composite score for verbal skills. So this does focus predominantly on the child's verbal skills, pre-reading or reading skills, hand-eye coordination, and then a sensory processing screener. And that, like I say, is carried out with 3 and 4 year olds that are probably in nursery and haven't started school just yet. Then we move on to the HLP Plus and HLP Light. So just to go through the differences there for you. The Plus is for children from the age of 5 to 17 year olds. And this again is an in-person assessment at one of our centres, either Milton Keynes or Gloucestershire, or at the moment Cheshire as well, for a short period of time. It includes the cognitive intelligence or the IQ test, achievement levels in reading, writing and maths, working memory, processing speed, a dyslexia screener if requested by the parent, and a screener for sensory processing differences. And then the Light is kind of a cut down version of that. So this is designed for children from the age of 7 to 17. The reason it's slightly older is because when we're conducting an online version of this one, we actually require the child to be able to concentrate for a little bit longer. So when they're a little bit older, we find this a little bit easier to do with them. This is an alternative, obviously, to the Plus, like I say, a slightly cut down version, hence the name Light. The key parts of that, though, are the cognitive intelligence, so the IQ tasks again, achievement levels in reading and maths, processing speed, and then a screener for sensory processing. And this one can actually be taken at the centre as well. So we can either conduct it as an online assessment for your child, or you can come into the centre and actually do it as a face-to-face cut down version. So you may come across something called add-ons on our website, which are some of the different assessments that we have that we might offer after we've actually assessed a child. So these are usually recommended by the assessor on the day, but if you have one in mind that you think you would like to investigate more, then obviously you can chat about it with the assessor to find out a little bit more information. So the top one there is the school advice pack. This is only available with the HLP Plus. This has a report which has more detailed information specifically for the school. So the regular Plus report is aimed at parents, families, to try and implement some of the strategies we provide into your day-to-day routines, whereas the school one is much more guidance for school and how they can support your child in school. You can have a school call with the early years or the HLP Light reports, but the school advice pack is not offered with those two reports. So a school call basically is usually a Teams meeting between the assessor and the school to chat through things, and that is an additional charge. We have a handwriting assessment, which is obviously in person only. That's conducted after the main report has been, the main assessment, sorry, has been done. If you feel that your child needs some support with handwriting, or again, the assessor highlights it as an area to look at. If your child has scored quite highly on the short sensory profile, then we may suggest the in-depth profile, which goes into a bit more detail about some of your child's sensory differences and gives you more advice about how to support your child with that. The emotional intelligence report is only from age 7 upwards, but again, if you feel that your child has some difficulties in this area, and possibly if the assessor recommends it, then that is something that we can consider as well. And then if your child scores particularly highly and the assessor believes that they may be suitable for acceleration, then they might recommend the acceleration evaluation, which is written alongside the HLP Plus report, and is used to help with guidance for schools as well. And then we also have some screeners available. We have an autism screener, social and emotional profile, and an ADHD screener. These just give the likelihood of your child having one of those. It is not a diagnosis. So if you think that your child may be demonstrating some characteristics of those, we can complete the screeners for you, and then it will give you a likelihood of whether they may or may not, and then you can proceed to then find another professional who could then assess your child for that. We've also got the anxiety, depression and self-concept screeners as well. These are all, as they say, 7+. And again, those may be recommended by the assessor, or if you have some particular concerns, you might actually want to request them, and then you can chat about those together. So that comes to the end of our information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to allow people to ask questions. I've seen a couple of hands up already, and if you want to pop any questions that you've got into the chat, that would be really helpful, and then I can go through those as well. Just bear with me if I take a little bit of time going through that, because I'm obviously just trying to keep an eye on things that are coming through and anyone that's still being let in. So just bear with me and I'll get to you as quickly as I can. Obviously we're all on mute, so when you have your question, please just unmute yourself, and then if you can put yourself back onto mute once you've answered your question, that would be great. So I did have a hand up from Jantira. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Is it not unmuting? Hang on, maybe I need to. Do you want to try unmuting now? No? Okay. Right, we've got some, okay, someone says I think the mics have been disabled. Right, bear with me 1 second. And I'll just see if I can check that. Okay, hopefully that should be okay. Yes, we have it.
Yes.
Sorry, I think that must have
Yeah.
been a feature I forgot to remove. Sorry. Right. Okay, would you
Cool.
like to go for it, Jantira?
Sure, thanks. I was wondering if you could do, I can't remember the name of the full package, but the full one in the middle, at age 4, and if not, can you do the cognitive IQ bet at age 4, or do you have to wait till 5?
So the early years assessment doesn't give a cognitive IQ score. That gives, we use something called the BRACEN, which is focused on school readiness. So we look at whether the child is ready for school. We look at a range of things: colours, numbers, letters, direction, position, emotional understanding. So that is our main area that we focus on for that one. If you are looking for an IQ score, that is the HLP Plus or HLP Light assessments, and that's when they're generally at school then. So they need to be sort of in reception upwards to be able to take part in one of those. So would your
Okay, and
child
that's a strict. So my child is starting reception in September and
okay,
just turned 4, so won't be 5 for a while.
yeah,
But is reading and writing and doing, like, year 3 math, really, actually. So that's
okay,
what we're trying to get
yeah.
a handle on, understanding his abilities.
Yeah, so what we usually advise is once they start reception, if you kind of give them a term or so to settle in, and then you could actually book a HLP plus assessment. Obviously, at that age, they're not old enough for the light assessment, but you could book a plus assessment and come in to us. So if you just sort of allow that period of time for settling, and then kind of look after Christmas and look at possibly booking
Okay.
an assessment then. If you did it now, you would be looking at an early years one, which may not be as useful to you. So it's weighing up whether you want to do it now and do the early years one, or whether you'd prefer to wait and do the HLP plus one.
Okay, sorry, but it's a term and reception would be okay. We don't have to wait till he turns 5.
So we do, when would he be 5?
March.
March, so might be best to wait and book an assessment. You could always book it after Christmas and book it ready for once he turns 5, only because our materials that we use start at 5 upwards. So yeah, if you booked it then for once he actually is 5, that would be probably advisable. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank
Okay,
you.
that's all right. Thank you for your question. Right, okay, I'm just going to have a look through the chat and see if we've got any other questions that are coming up. So, right. Okay. So we've answered Jantira's question. So we have a question from Rita. Can you please advise how the pricing works and whether there are discounts for a child claiming DLA? So we have something called the Opportunity Access Fund, which is kind of like a scholarship fund that we have available. That has certain criteria that you are required to meet. I don't have that criteria in front of me at the moment to check if that is one of them, but you could call the office and they would be able to go through what the criteria is for that. And then you would be able to help with part funding towards the assessment. And so that's how that works. In terms of the pricing, again, I haven't got that immediately in front of me, but our prices, I believe, should be on the website. And again, if you call the office, they'll be able to go through with you all of the different prices for each of the different assessments. So I hope that answers that question, Rita. So during the assessment for a 5-year-old, would the parent be in the same room as the child for the assessment? And how long is the duration of the assessment on the day? So we urge children to come in on their own, because obviously we have problems with validity if we have other people present in the room. The majority of children, to be honest, actually are happy to come into the room on their own with the assessor. If for any reason they're not, then we try to look at different ways that we can help to settle them, and we can talk to them about different things. The day is very much child-led, so it's completely based around what they're comfortable with. So if they require more breaks, that's absolutely fine. Some children may not want breaks, and so we go with that as well. We always have lunch in the middle of the day, at least 2 breaks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, but like I say, more if the child needs it or we feel that they need it. And usually for a HLP plus, most children tend to take about 4 hours to complete all of the tasks. Obviously, it depends on the age of the child, because younger children obviously won't go quite so far through the task, whereas slightly older children might go further through, so it could take them a little bit longer. And again, it was all based on how quickly your child works and how many breaks they need. So it's a little bit difficult to answer that question completely. But like I say, we work with the child. We try and take signs when we see that they might be tiring and that kind of thing, as much as we can. So next we have, what's the advantage of doing this assessment through you versus a private clinic? So obviously there are other places around that you could go to for a similar service. However, like I say, we have been assessing since 2013. I think we see about 150 children a year, and our specialism is in high learning potential. So you may not necessarily find other places that have that expertise. But then having said that, with that being our area of specialism, we're not able to diagnose other things such as autism or ADHD. We can alert you if we think there are any signs that your child might be showing anything like that. But we don't diagnose those aspects. However, HLP is our area of expertise, and like I say, so that's why we offer the service that we do. Obviously, we're also one of the only groups that actually provide this support for parents and children. So Mensa, they focus much more on adults, but we look more at empowering parents and their children. So that's kind of the difference. So I hope that answers that for you. So Denise asks, the parent being in the same room, does this also apply to 3-year-olds? So again, we prefer the child to come into the assessment, the early years assessment, on their own if they can. Some children obviously may be quite worried about leaving their parents, so we might sort of allow the parents to come in at the start just to help settle them. The early years one is a little bit different in that we have elements of play involved in there as well, so it might be that we might kind of ask the parents to come in while we do a little bit of playing, and then if the child feels a bit more comfortable, then the parent may be able to leave. And obviously we just try and make sure that we incorporate those breaks I mentioned and remind them that their parent is only just down the corridor and all of that kind of thing, to kind of help them to settle as much as possible. But it's again a little bit different for every child, so we take each situation as it comes and kind of deal with it then the best that we can. So we usually manage to make it work one way or another. So yeah, most children are usually absolutely fine and will either stay with us, or we may have a bit of adult support from parents if we need it. Okay, so we have, what does a sensory processing screener entail? So the sensory processing screener comes to you before the assessment. It's a questionnaire for you to complete the series of questions to answer on kind of a scale from 1 to 5, being sort of 1 not very often to 5 being all the time, that kind of idea. And that looks at sensory aspects and sensory behaviours as well. And then that comes back to us and we obviously go through it, and that will give us an indication of how likely your child is to have sensory differences. And it looks at sensory seeking, sensory avoidance, and sensory sensitivity. Those are the 3 main areas that would tend to crop up the most, and then that helps us to then tailor the information that we give to you in your report to help you with those things at home or at school. But also it helps us as well as part of the assessment, because if your screener has come back saying that your child finds it difficult to sit still or might find noises outside the room distracting, then obviously that helps the assessor to understand that before we see you, and then we're prepared for that. So that's why the sensory screener is quite an important one for us before the day. So if the child has a diagnosis already, how do you take that into account into your assessment? So if your child has a diagnosis already, we obviously would like to have as much information as possible about that. If you can send that in to us, it might obviously be a pediatrician's report, or you may have had an external assessment done, but all of that again helps the assessor to understand what we need to do when the child comes to us. So if there are any special circumstances that we need to take into consideration, then obviously that helps us. But also if your child is HLP, then it would put them into the bracket of dual or multiple exceptionality, which there's a lot more information on our website about that. But it's basically when a child is HLP and also has an additional need. And so then when you're looking at support for that child, you need to make sure that you are providing appropriate challenge, but that you are also providing support for that additional need as well. And obviously once that balance is right, that's when you're going to get the best out of your child, and they're going to feel, you know, that things are working well for them. So that's why, again, that is important for us to know before you come to your assessment if your child already has a diagnosis. Do the assessments have an expiry date? So if I get an assessment for my 9-year-old now, would that still be taken seriously by the time she starts secondary school in 2 years? So generally, the the assessments don't have an expiry date, we generally find that once we give your report and it says that your child is HLP, that then continues with them throughout school. The only thing that you may find is that some of our recommendations may not be as appropriate a few years down the line. So we try to give you information that's right for your child now so that you can work with them at the stage they're at now. But then if you were then going to secondary school and saying, okay, this is the report we had done a few years ago, the guidance might be more aimed at kind of primary level rather than secondary level, so they might not find it as useful. However, it still does say that your child has high learning potential and therefore obviously they need to take that into consideration. So it might just be that recommendations are not as up to date at that point, but the actual assessment doesn't have an expiry date as such in terms of has your child got HLP or not. Also, just to add on to that, actually, some people do often have their child assessed again, just because they sometimes find, especially before going to secondary school, it might be quite useful. So if they've had them assessed when they were younger, perhaps in Key Stage 1, they might then want to have them assessed again, maybe around year 5, thinking about moving on to secondary school. So regarding the school advice pack, can you give some examples of the types of advice provided to schools, particularly for children of higher cognitive ability? So if you would like to see an example of some of our reports, both the Plus, Light and Score Report and Early Years, actually, the office are able to send you an example, which will give you an idea of the kind of thing that you will expect to see within the report. But in terms of the school advice pack, so I mentioned earlier the guidance is, so this gives them some of the links to our resources that we have available for schools, which helps them to think about questioning, how they can extend children through problem solving, how they might be able to take a task and how they might be able to reframe it or remodel it for a child with higher ability. So like I say, it is a bit more aimed at the school rather than parents, because it gives them actual examples that they can take away and work with. But if you wanted to see an example of a report, the office will be more than happy to send you examples, and then obviously you'll be able to see the kind of things involved in the report there. Okay, so if considering Mensa in the future, could early years assessment form part of the supporting info? So we have had some parents send the early years assessments across to Mensa. Some parents have had found that Mensa have accepted them, and there are a few that I know of that has happened with. Usually Mensa prefer to have an IQ score. I believe 98th percentile upwards is what they're looking for. So that's why the HLP Plus and Light reports are slightly better from that point of view. But there's nothing to stop you sending an early years report across and seeing if they think that they would look at that information and want to kind of put their child onto Mensa membership from that point of view. So that's kind of not the best answer, I realise, but I think that's where we're at with Mensa. We try to work in partnership with them as much as possible, so it's worth contacting them to see if they have any advice on that one. In your experience, have you found schools to be receptive to your input in their support of the child at school? So this one is a tricky question to answer. It does vary a little bit. We have some schools that are incredibly supportive and are very supportive of parents before they come for assessment, and then also afterwards once they receive the information. However, we have other schools that are not quite as receptive, and they actually don't find that the school is willing to take on board the advice given. Unfortunately, schools by law are not required to take on board any third-party advice. That could be from anybody. It could be an educational psychologist. It could be from an assessment that you've had for an additional need with another professional or an occupational therapist, they don't have to take that on board. So we do find varying degrees of success with that. It's always worth having a conversation with your child's school just to see if you can kind of gauge their response, because the last thing you want to do is spend a lot of money on the additional school advice pack and then actually find that school are not willing to take it on board at all. So it's worth being open with them, talking to them a bit about what you're planning to do, and gauging how they feel they could get involved with that. So do they have to be 3 for the early years, or could it be done 1 month before? We live in Manchester, Cheshire, ends in July and years in August. Yes, the Cheshire ones, I believe the last few are going to be in July. It's just we've had a few changes with assessors at the moment, and we can provide Cheshire just for a short period, but I believe it has to be 3. I think for us to be able to give the scores, I think the earliest is 3, so I'm not sure that doing it earlier than that is possible, but I can check that one, and I can always get back to you. So probably the best thing to do in that case will be to either phone the office or email Amazing Children to find out that response. That's probably the easiest way to do that. So next question, of the 150 children you see during the year, how many are found to have HLP? To be honest, the majority, I believe. As an assessor myself, obviously I can't say this for the other assessors necessarily, but for myself, there are very few that don't show up as HLP. I think you know your child best, and if you're seeing traits, then that's the reason you've come to us. And we have a lot of information on our website as well that you can go through. We have a questionnaire that you can complete, which just can be helpful to find out if you think you're at least on the right track. We also have something called the Potential Spotter, which is another good one that you can complete before you commit to a full-on assessment. And quite often, once parents have done those things, or they've chatted through what their child is demonstrating with either someone in the office or an assessor as part of an assessment call, then actually you're usually coming to the right place, if that makes sense. So there are very few children that we have that don't come out as HLP. There are a few parents that come to us just because they like to be able to see the profile of their child. It's quite useful because obviously the tests that we offer are quite different to what they do at school. So some parents, especially home educating parents, have found that quite useful to be able to sort of gauge where the child's at. So yeah, there's lots of advantages to that as well in different ways, but not just obviously showing HLP. So next one, if no IQ score for the early years, what format is the result of the assessment in? So the early years assessment, as I said earlier, focuses on kind of their school readiness. So there's a school readiness section, which looks at whether they're able to identify numbers, colours, letters of the alphabet, and then it goes on to look at other aspects such as do they understand direction, textures, emotions, and there's a whole range of different things. And this just, as I say, is all verbal. There is no non-verbal element to the early years assessment, unlike the HLP Plus and Light, which do have non-verbal elements. So we base what their score is on how advanced they are for their age. So rather than giving you an IQ score, we still give you a percentile range. We always do that so that we're showing you out of 100 children, where would your child lie within that? We always give that. And then for the early years assessments, we also give you kind of like an age comparison. So, you know, for instance, if they're reading, they might be reading at the level of a 5 and 3 month year old, that kind of idea. So you can get that understanding. But no IQ score, obviously, like the other ones. So our child is 2.5 years old. Would you recommend to wait until 5-year-old to do the assessment? So it is a tricky one. It depends, I think, a bit on whether you feel your child could come to the assessment, be happy to leave you, to come into the assessment room, go through the different tasks, or whether you think actually they would benefit from being a bit older before they did an assessment. It might be worth booking an assessment call. So for anybody that wants to book an assessment call, before you book an assessment, we do like you to be able to have a call with an assessor to just check that you feel the assessment is going to do what you would like it to do. Obviously, we don't want you to book something and not be fully prepared for what's going to happen. And even if you've done this evening, you might still have additional questions that you'd like to talk to someone on a one-to-one basis. So if you decide you'd like to go for an assessment, you can call the office, book a time to speak to an assessor, which could be myself or someone else, and we can run through the tests in a little bit more detail. You can give us a bit more of your background information, and then we can help to talk it through and whether you think it's appropriate for your child. So I'd urge everyone to do that if you're considering the assessment, because it's just worth having that chat with someone to make sure it absolutely is the right thing for you. So do we know when the next round of funding is available for concessionary members? I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I don't have anything to do with funding, I'm afraid. But if you contact the office, either by phone or email, they'll be able to explain that to you a little bit more. Okay. Is PPUK Pro Acceleration for profoundly gifted children? We do support acceleration for profoundly gifted children. It's something that we believe that if the child is academically able but also emotionally capable of being accelerated, then we do believe it is in the best interest of the child. Obviously, it's important to take in the emotional and social aspect as well. It's not just about the IQ score. So like I said earlier, we look at the whole situation, the whole child, to make sure it is right for them. So if you did an acceleration report or acceleration evaluation, that would ask questions about whether the child themselves wants to be accelerated, whether you feel emotionally they would cope with that, whether they would miss friends if they move to a different year group, all of those kinds of things. So we don't take it lightly, but if we feel it's right for the child, then we are obviously pro acceleration for a child that, you know, could be moved on a year or maybe even more. Can your report be used for applying for scholarship for private schools? So I believe some parents have used that. We have had a few parents that have looked at specific schools for their child and have used our reports to help them with getting into private schools. So again, it's worth having a chat with the school in question to see if that's something that they are interested in considering, because again, we wouldn't want you to go down the route of spending lots of money and then finding that, you know, it wasn't going to be of any benefit for that reason. Obviously, it could be of benefit in lots of other ways, but not particularly for that. Would schools accept acceleration? So again, this is a little bit like what I said earlier with the school report. Some schools are very willing to accept acceleration, others not so much. Unfortunately, again, it's not something that is expected in this country, and therefore it does require obviously quite a lot of input from the school to do that. So it's worth having the conversation with the school to see if they would support that. We have had some parents who, if the school has not been supportive of that, they have looked at moving to different schools. So we have lots of information available on our website, and if you're a member, then that's all open to you. to be able to use that information that helps with looking at school provision, how to talk to schools about this kind of thing. And also our advice line is very useful for having discussions about how to kind of broach the subject with the school. We have quite a lot of parents that use the advice line to help with, school support and that kind of thing, and how to approach the school. Is there any ongoing support or option for reassessment later, especially if the child's development shifts quickly? What about fees for reassessment? So we do have children that come back and are assessed again. We generally say wait at least a year, but the majority of parents do wait longer than that, kind of around 2 years. Some people will do an early years assessment and then may come back later on for a HLP plus assessment. And then, like I said before, some parents often tend to have their child reassessed around year 5, kind of moving towards secondary school age. There is no difference in the price, unfortunately. The price is the same, and obviously depends on whether our prices have changed within that time as well. But just because you've had your child assessed before, unfortunately, doesn't allow you to kind of do a kind of quick add-on, if that makes sense. So it will be a completely new assessment, may well be with a different assessor as well. So it is completely standalone from what's been before. However, we do look at the previous report and take all of that into account when we're doing the new assessment. With acceleration, would it be shown on the report if it's recommended or not for the child? So generally with acceleration, we will definitely put that into the report if we feel it is appropriate. Occasionally, we might suggest that it's appropriate in just a subject area. So we do have some children that are achieving very highly in certain areas, such as maths or reading, and we would then say, we recommend subject acceleration for that child, and sometimes schools are more willing to support that. If the child is exceptionally able or profoundly gifted, as mentioned earlier, then we would definitely advise that in the report if we felt that was appropriate. But as I said before, we have to look at the whole situation. So just because it's on the scores that the child is particularly able, if the child is not socially and emotionally able to adjust at the same pace, then we may say, okay, this may not be right at the moment. So that's where the acceleration evaluation can sometimes be useful, because it has a series of questions to answer. And if there were any questions which come out a bit lower, then it wouldn't recommend acceleration. So usually when we think a child should be accelerated overall, we would suggest the acceleration evaluation is done at the same time to be absolutely sure that it's going to be appropriate. Based on your experience, is there an IQ range where the assessment and the recommended school adjustments are of significant benefit to the child? We already know the IQ of an older sibling and believe the young child is likely to be in a similar range. So the IQ range is quite a broad range. At the bottom, you have mildly gifted, and then it goes through into gifted and then moderately gifted, and then we start getting into highly gifted, exceptionally gifted, and then profoundly gifted. So it's quite a broad range. We say for us that HLP is recognised from a score of 116 upwards. So that's children that are falling in that mildly gifted range there, and obviously upwards. But thinking about the stages of giftedness, obviously different children are going to need different things at slightly different times and done in different ways. And this is why each report is unique to your child. So we're looking at their scores across the range of things we've tested, but we're also taking into account information you've provided to us and the schools provided to us as well, so that we can actually look at that and say, okay, so this child will benefit from having a bit more support in this area, but then a bit more challenge in this area. And we obviously also look at the things like the working memory and the processing speed and how those impact on their cognitive ability as well. So that's why each report you'll never find the same report twice, because it is completely tailored to your child's circumstances. I hope that kind of answers that. I'm not sure if that does, but if not, let me know. We're kind of getting towards the end of the session now. I've noticed a few people kind of leave, so maybe they've had questions answered already. So next question, can we go to the assessment centre to see it or meet the assessor before the booking? So we don't generally have that option to go to the assessment centre. However, we have got some videos. So all of our assessors have filmed a video of themselves, just to give you a bit of information about us, and also so you can see us and your child can see us, so they know who to expect to meet when they arrive there. We've also got videos of the assessment centres as well. I think we definitely know we have one for Milton Keynes. I think we have one for Gloucestershire, but I will double check on that one. And the one in Cheshire currently we don't, because obviously that's for such a small period of time. But yeah, that's something we've done recently, just to help parents to understand what they're going to be doing. We give you some information about the venue as well. So for instance, the Milton Keynes venue, we're based at the Open University, and so we're on campus and we have a cafe there, and you'll see students around and that kind of thing. So it helps you to understand where you're coming to, but also to help to settle your child as well, so that they know where they're going and who they'll be meeting when they're there. And each family is the only family there at the same time, at the time, sorry, there's nobody else that comes for assessment on the same day. So we have a family room, and that is your room for the day. Your child will obviously come back to you for breaks and lunch and things like that, and so you'll base yourself there, and then we will just pop back as and when we take breaks and that kind of thing. So it's just the assessor, the family, and whoever's in the office, which will be one of our lovely office staff who are always on hand to help with anything. So that sometimes helps families and children. They know that there's not going to be anybody else around. It will just be them. Can I check the IQ score determined on the day will give a specific score number, or is it in a range? So the tests obviously that we do are never 100% reliable. So we give a 90% accuracy rate. So in the report, what you'll get is the actual score that they achieved, but you'll also get something called confidence intervals, which is a range. So your score could sit within that. So if your child say was tested on another day, they might perform better or they might perform worse, and it would possibly fall somewhere in that range. But also, like I say, because testing is never 100% accurate, so although you get the score, which is like the IQ score, if that's what you're thinking of, you then get the range it's in, and then we also give you a percentile score, so a bit like when they're babies and they're measured and weighed and that kind of thing, out of 100 children their age, we give you that percentile score as well. So you've got all of those different bits in the report. Can you choose different starting time for the day? So if you live quite a long way away, we are willing to look at start times. Most of our start times are 10 o'clock in the morning, but if you did have a long way to come, then we can negotiate that sometimes and start at 11 maybe, or likewise, if for other reasons you need to start early, then we might be able to start earlier for you. I think normally the earliest is 9 o'clock, but we can negotiate that. Again, something to chat about with the office when you're booking. What happens if your child is ill on the day or before the day? So if your child is ill, then that's absolutely fine, as long as you can let us know as soon as possible. We can then postpone the assessment. I'm not sure whether we're allowed to postpone once or maybe even twice. We'll obviously look at other dates that are available for you to come come instead. So you won't lose your money or anything. That is built into our terms and conditions, I believe, that if you need to cancel because of illness, and likewise, if an assessor had to cancel for any reason, then they'd find the next available slot for you. So how long after the assessment is the report given, or is it there and then? So on the day, we like to be able to give you a bit of feedback about how your child's got on. Generally, that's usually the cognitive tasks and the memory tasks. It's not always possible to mark everything because obviously they do quite a lot of tasks during the day, but we like to be able to have a little chat with you before you go home, so at least you know how your child's got on. The report then takes 3 weeks for us to write and send to you. If it's over a holiday period such as Christmas or Easter or the summer holiday, then it might be up to 5 weeks, and that's in our terms and conditions. And then once you've received your report and you've had a chance to read it, you're able to then have a Teams meeting with the assessor if you've got any further questions or anything else that you want to talk through afterwards, and that can be arranged between you at a mutually convenient time. And also, if you take up the school advice pack as well, the school are able to do that as well. So they're able to have a Teams meeting with the assessor to ask any further questions. So that's an option with that as well. Will a pre-chat phone call help us decide any add-on reports to screeners, or are those decided mainly after the assessment, once the assessor has seen your child? So we prefer to wait until we've seen your child to advise on any add-ons. Sometimes you might think that you need it and the assessor might not believe that that's necessary. However, occasionally we might say, oh, we think it would be worth doing this. So the add-ons usually are afterwards, but some parents do sometimes have them in mind before they come to us. And then obviously that can be discussed on the day. With the screeners, those can be done up to 6 months afterwards. The school report, however, needs to be done at the same time because obviously the information with that we want to make sure is current and up to date from the schools we have. What are the fees for the add-on assessments, and would this be on the website? So anything that you do not find on the website, I would urge you to just give the office a call or drop them an email. They have all of the pricing there. I don't have it to hand in front of me and I don't want to give you any wrong information. So that would be the best thing to do, just to double check. And someone said they are on the website. They should all be. I think that's something that's recently been updated. So they should be our up-to-date prices. I'm just conscious that we're on the last few minutes now, so I'll try and answer the last few questions that are here. Is there a particular benefit to doing the early years assessment at age 3 rather than waiting till age 4? For example, is the child assessed against age-specific expectations? So a 3-year-old is only compared with other 3-year-olds. So yeah, so the way it works is it is based on children of the same age. So yes, if you assess your child at the age of 3, then we are comparing them to other children of their age. If you wait till 4, it's compared to other children of their age. So yeah, there probably is no benefit in that sense, other than whether you think your child would engage with all of the tasks. It might be better to wait if you think they may not, because as they get older, they might be happier to do that. So it's purely down to that rather than to the age-specific expectation of the assessment itself. It's more whether you think they would cope with what they're expected to do at that time. And again, probably an assessor call would be useful for that, for you to chat through kind of that sort of thing. Okay. Right, I can see someone is typing, so I'll just wait 1 second for that. But I think as we are at the kind of point of 9 o'clock. Thank you everybody for joining. I hope it's been useful. Like I say, if there's anything that I haven't been able to answer for you, or you'd just like to have the chance to talk to someone in a bit more detail, then you can call our office or email amazing.children@potentialplusuk.org, and then one of us will get back to you with a bit more information. But thanks very much for joining. I hope it has been useful, and hope to see some of you in the future. Thank you. Bye.